Hello everyone, welcome to the Epic Flight Academy. That's right, you are back in the Private Pilot Ground School course. My name is Mike Thompson. We are so glad you are here. Now, to be successful in this course, remember three things. Number one, you must be studying Epic's online learning course and all of the connected resources in that course. Number two, these videos just parallel that content. Number three, and just as important, you must review this content with your flight instructor. So our topic today is, drum roll please, navigation terms. In order to understand navigation, let's just get started with the definition of some of the common terminology. Hey, speaking of navigation, you could navigate your way to Amazon.com and find Telling is Not Teaching by yours truly, Mike Thompson. So let's start in on some of these terms. Well, the first three terms we're going to see are terms describing the types of navigation. So I want you to think about hopping in your car, if you drive a car. I know some people don't, most people do. Or you're riding along with somebody who drives a car and you're going to drive from the airport home. Well, how are you going to navigate from the airport home? I'll bet you don't even think about it. What we typically do is we pull out onto the highway and we say, at the third traffic light, where I see that McDonald's, I'm going to turn left. That's going to take me to the on-ramp to the interstate. And when I'm on the interstate, I'm going to look for the second off-ramp. I'm going to take a left and go down to the Walgreens. At the Walgreens, I'm going to turn right, and up ahead on my left, I'm going to see the sign for my apartment complex. Now, why did I mention that? Because you know what we just did? We just did what we call pilotage. Pilotage is when we reference landmarks to help us navigate to and from specific locations. We do that all the time when we're driving a vehicle. Now, we do the same thing in boats and we do the same thing in airplanes. When we are in the air, we might be flying up the East Coast, and we'll fly past the mouth of the St. Johns River and the big city of Jacksonville. And we'll say, oh, if I look out the left side of my airplane, I'm northbound here up the coast. Clearly, that's the St. Johns and that's Jacksonville. And what's going to come next is the coast is going to curve slightly. And as I follow the coast, I'm going to see St. Simon's, and that's very distinctive. There's an airport, and I'll work my way north, and I'll see the Outer Banks of North Carolina and Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay, and I'm navigating by visual connection to those points. That is pilotage. The second major type of navigation we call dead reckoning. And you can see that on our slide here. It's spelled D-E-A-D, dead reckoning. Well, what does that mean? Dum dum da dum dum da dum 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 dum. Something's dead, or you're going to be dead if you navigate this way, or maybe if you get lost, you're going to be dead. No, time out, don't panic. We're not talking about death or dying. Here is what we really mean by dead reckoning. We're taking time and speed and a known direction or heading, and we know the distance to a certain point, and we're using those four things to deduce where we are. For example, if we're flying over open water or the desert and we don't have a lot of visual landmarks, so we can't really do pilotage effectively, we've got a good idea of our ground speed, we know our direction and distance, and we're going to make time, speed, distance calculations and deduce our position and where we're heading. Now, when we say deduce, we're talking about deduction. And the first three letters of deduce or deduction are DED. And when we say dead reckoning, that's what we mean. DED, dead reckoning. Not dum dum da dum dum da dum 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 dum. Not DEAD, dead, but DED, deduced reckoning. If you think in terms of global history, most of the navigation that's happened globally up until modern times has been either pilotage or deduced reckoning, or a combination of pilotage and deduced reckoning. Until lately, in the last century or so, electronic resources and radio navigation has come about. In the last 2 or 3 decades, space-based navigation has come about. We call that satellite navigation, or WAS for short. Anytime we think about a radio navigation or satellite navigation, we can lump that together and call this type of navigation electronic navigation. So those are our 3 basic ways to navigate. Now, as we navigate, we want to become aware with some of the navigational equipment on board the airplane. Here's where it's going to be very important for you to review this with your flight instructor, because you're going to see that not all airplanes have all of the equipment we are going to talk about. Also, as electronic navigation evolves and becomes more and more advanced, some of these radio and electronic systems are fading from use, and other systems are coming more and more into use. So the first one to talk about is the HSI. That's short for Horizontal Situation Indicator. The HSI combines the heading indicator with an overlay of the VOR indicator. Then we have what we call the RMI, or radio magnetic indicator. This combines the heading indicator with 2 VOR indicators. We also have what we call distance measuring equipment, or DME. DME measures distance between the ground receiver or the ground transmitter and the aircraft receiver. Important to understand with DME, that's a direct line from transmitter to receiver. Now, discuss this with your flight instructor. But, for example, imagine that ground receiver were here and the aircraft were flying over the top of it. So we'll show that graphically. A ground receiver, aircraft coming over the top. Now, horizontally, this aircraft is 0 distance from that ground receiver. But vertically, if I'm at 5,280 feet, my DME will show 1 statute mile distance. So that DME distance is direct from the transmitter to the receiver. Another system is called the Automatic Direction Finder, or ADF. The ADF operates in the low to medium frequencies and is an older system of radio navigation that uses ground-based non-directional beacons, or NDBs. Now, these are gradually being faded out, so you're going to want to talk with your flight instructor about this system of navigation. More advanced electronic navigation includes RNAV. RNAV, that's short for Area Navigation. And the way this works is the RNAV is a computer that can do trigonometry at the speed of light and actually move waypoints around and allow me as a pilot in my aircraft to navigate directly from one imaginary waypoint to another. And then finally we have GPS, or Global Positioning System. This is the satellite-based system. Now, we'll get into this in more detail when we talk about your instrument rating, For now, just read about it in your book, understand that we have GPS, review that with your flight instructor. So now that we've talked about the three major types of navigation and some of the common navigational instruments, let's define a couple of terms. The first one we want to talk about is the course. The course is the course over the ground that I intend to fly. When I navigate, I usually draw this course. I literally draw it on a paper chart, or it is electronically drawn for me on an electronic chart. The next term to look at is the magnetic course, or sometimes called the magnetic track. The magnetic course is the true course corrected for variation. Now, we've described variation in a different video. The third term that we want to talk about is what we call the wind correction angle, or WCA for short. You can see in this graphic, we're showing this airplane flying from the left to the right. Let's say this airplane is eastbound. And this light blue arrow here represents the wind. Let's say the wind is from the north. And this aircraft, in order to fly this course directly east, must alter its heading just slightly north of east to compensate for that wind drift. Now, that compensation, that difference between course and heading, is called the wind correction angle. Now, have you ever been to the beach? Well, in beautiful New Smyrna Beach, Florida, a lot of us like to go to the beach frequently. One of the things we're going to see are little sand crabs. And when we come up to these sand crabs as we walk along the beach, they scurry away into their holes. And when you watch them scurry, they sort of scurry sideways like that. Because those crabs are walking sideways, sometimes when we put a wind correction angle into the aircraft, as you see in our diagram, we sometimes call that a crab angle for short. Now, the aircraft is not actually flying sideways, but we sometimes use that term crab angle. The next term we want to identify is ground speed. Now, you remember from an earlier video, we talked about the different types of airspeed, and we talked about iced tea being a pretty cool drink. Remember that? Oh boy, do I love iced tea. Don't know about you, but I love it. Well, the other speed that we talk about is ground speed. The ground speed of the aircraft is its speed over the ground, and that's affected entirely by the wind. All right, another term that we want to identify is what we call a leg. Now, most of us have two legs. I know I'm standing on one leg right now. That's not the leg we're talking about. We're talking about the segment of a cross-country course. When we fly from point A to point B, oftentimes, or almost always, that course is broken up into different segments. Those segments are called legs. Now, those legs go from waypoint to waypoint, or checkpoint to checkpoint. Now, waypoints exist electronically in navigation systems, and checkpoints are items that we visually identify on the ground. Sounds like pilotage, right? That's exactly what it is. So when we talk about flight planning, we have the true course that we set up using lines of longitude. Then we have the true heading. That is my true course corrected for wind. Remember, the difference between course and heading is my wind correction angle. And then we have magnetic heading. That's my heading now corrected for variation, which we've talked about in another video. And then finally, compass heading. That's when we take our magnetic heading and we correct that for compass deviation. And you remember that little deviant that caused our compass to deviate? That was also from an earlier video. Well, folks, that just about wraps up the terminology that we will commonly use when we talk about navigation in private pilot training. Here's a real quick review question for you. What are the three main categories of navigation? If you said pilotage, dead reckoning, not D-E-A-D, but D-E-D, dead reckoning, and electronic, you got it. Well, folks, join us next time.